I looked at her expectantly, taking a sip of my coffee. My best friend Sarah leaned in, eager to hear the story I was about to tell. I took a deep breath and began. You know, Sarah, 5 years ago, I thought I had it all. A loving husband, a fulfilling career as a teacher, and a cozy little house in our picture-perfect town. Ryan and I seemed like the ideal couple, high school sweethearts who married young and were living out our happily ever after. At least, that's what I believed at the time. I still remember the day we first met. It was at a charity car wash organized by our school. I was struggling with a particularly stubborn bit of dirt on a pickup truck when Ryan swooped in to help. He made me laugh with his corny jokes, and by the end of the day, I was smitten. We started dating soon after and were practically inseparable throughout high school and college. When he proposed on our graduation day, I didn't hesitate to say yes. We got married in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by our family and friends. Everyone said we were perfect for each other, and I believed it with all my heart. Fast forward to our 5th wedding anniversary. Ryan surprised me with a romantic dinner at home. He'd cooked my favorite meal, lasagna, and even managed not to burn it this time. We laughed and talked for hours, reminiscing about our journey together. As I looked into his eyes across the candlelit table, I felt so lucky to have found my soulmate. But life has a funny way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. The next day, I decided to do something special for my students. I organized a readathon to raise money for new library books. The kids were so excited, and their enthusiasm was infectious. I stayed late at school, helping them make posters and plan their reading lists. When I finally got home, exhausted but happy, I found Ryan waiting for me with a huge bouquet of roses. Just because, he said with that charming smile of his. I melted, thinking how thoughtful he was. We cuddled on the couch, and I told him all about my day and the readathon. He listened attentively, asking questions and offering suggestions. It felt so good to share my passion with someone who seemed to truly care. Little did I know that this moment of blissful ignorance would be one of the last. If only I had known then what was lurking beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect life. But hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? As I drifted off to sleep that night, nestled in Ryan's arms, I felt secure in the knowledge that I had a partner who loved and supported me unconditionally. Or so I thought. The seeds of doubt hadn't been planted yet, and my world still felt whole and unshakable. Looking back now, I realize how naive I was. But isn't that always the case? We never see the storm coming until we're caught in the middle of it, desperately trying to find shelter. And let me tell you, Sarah, the storm that was about to hit my life was one I never saw coming. I paused, taking another sip of my coffee. Sarah's eyes were wide with anticipation. Go on, she urged. What happened next? I settled back in my chair, ready to continue my story. Sarah leaned forward, hanging on my every word. So, where was I? Oh yes, the calm before the storm. It's funny how life can change so quickly, isn't it? One day you're living in blissful ignorance, and the next, tiny cracks start appearing in your perfect world. It all began about a month after our anniversary. I remember it clearly because it was the night of the school's annual talent show. I'd been working late, helping my students prepare their acts. When I got home, exhausted but excited, I found Ryan glued to his phone. Hey, honey, I called out, dropping my bags by the door. You wouldn't believe the amazing acts the kids have prepared. Ryan looked up, startled. Oh, hey, he said, quickly putting his phone face down on the coffee table. How was your day? I didn't think much of it at the time. I was too busy chattering about the upcoming show, describing the elaborate dance routine my 5th graders had choreographed. But looking back, that was the first red flag. As the days went by, I started noticing little things. Ryan's phone would buzz late at night, and he'd quickly grab it, often leaving the room to respond. At first, I brushed it off. It's probably work, I told myself. He's been trying to close that big deal. But then one night, as we were getting ready for bed, his phone chimed with a message. Ryan practically dove across the room to get it. Everything okay? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, he said, not meeting my eyes. I just a client reaching out about a car. At 11:30 at night, I couldn't keep the skepticism out of my voice. Ryan shrugged. You know how it is. Some people only have time to car shop after work. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in his tone, the way he wouldn't quite look at me, set off a tiny alarm bell in the back of my mind. The next morning, as I was making coffee, Ryan's phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. Before I could even think about it, I glanced at the screen. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you later, miss you already." My heart dropped to my stomach. I must have made a sound because Ryan came rushing in, snatching his phone off the counter. Everything okay? He asked, his voice a little too high. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As soon as he left for work, I burst into tears. What was going on? Was I overreacting? Maybe it was just a friend or a family member. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. For the next few weeks, I found myself watching Ryan more closely. I noticed how he'd turn away slightly when texting, angling his body so I couldn't see the screen. How he'd suddenly need to work late, more often. How he'd come home smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. Each little thing on its own could be explained away. But together, they painted a picture I didn't want to see. I tried to talk to him about it once. Ryan, I said one night as we were doing the dishes. Is everything okay? You seem distant lately. He laughed it off. Of course, everything's fine. Just been busy with work, that's all. I wanted so badly to believe him, to think that I was just being paranoid. But the nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. Then came the night that really sealed it for me. We were supposed to have dinner with my parents. I'd reminded Ryan that morning before he left for work. But as the hours ticked by and it got closer to the time we were supposed to leave, Ryan was nowhere to be found. I called his cell over and over, but it went straight to voicemail. I even called his office, but no one answered. Finally, just as I was about to leave without him, he burst through the door looking disheveled. I'm so sorry, he panted. I got caught up with a client and lost track of time. But as he rushed past me to change, I caught a whiff of that perfume again. And when he bent to kiss my cheek, I saw a smudge of lipstick on his collar. In that moment, my world shattered. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was very, very wrong in my marriage. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were wide with shock and sympathy. Oh, Emily, she whispered. What did you do? I took a deep breath, ready to continue my tale. Well, that's when things really started to get complicated. I took a deep breath, steeling myself to continue my story. Sarah's eyes were filled with concern as she waited for me to go on. After that night, it was like I was living in a fog. Every little thing Ryan did seemed suspicious to me. The way he'd check his phone constantly, how he'd suddenly have to work late more often, even the way he'd avoid eye contact sometimes when we talked. It was driving me crazy. I remember one particular evening, about a week after the dinner incident. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when Ryan came home. He breezed in, gave me a quick peck on the cheek, and headed straight for the shower. As I heard the water running, I noticed his phone on the counter, forgotten in his haste. I stared at it for what felt like hours, my heart pounding. Should I look? Was I that person now? The one who snoops through their partner's phone? But then I remembered the lipstick, the perfume, the secretive texting. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed the phone. It was locked, of course. I tried his birthday, our anniversary, even his favorite football player's number. Nothing. Just as I was about to give up, I had a thought. On a whim, I typed in the date we first met. The phone unlocked. My hands were shaking as I opened his messages. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Work emails, texts from his buddies about fantasy football. But then I saw a conversation with a contact named A. My blood ran cold as I read the messages. Miss you already. Can't wait for our next business meeting. One message read, "You look so beautiful today. I can't stop thinking about you," said another. I felt like I was going to be sick. I quickly put the phone back where I found it and rushed to the bathroom, barely making it in time to throw up. As I sat on the cold tile floor, tears streaming down my face, I heard the shower turn off. "Emily, you okay in there?" Ryan's voice came through the door. I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal. "Yeah, just feeling a bit under the weather. I'll be out in a minute." That night, as we lay in bed, I couldn't stop my mind from racing. Who was A? How long had this been going on? Was our entire marriage a lie? The next few weeks were torture. I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find Ryan texting, the blue light of his phone illuminating his face in the darkness. He'd claim it was work, but I knew better now. I started noticing other things too. How he'd come home later and later, always with some excuse about traffic or a demanding client. How he'd suddenly become protective of his laptop, closing it whenever I entered the room. One day, I came home early from school to find a receipt from a fancy restaurant in town, crumpled in the trash. When I asked Ryan about it, he stammered something about a business lunch, but I knew for a fact he'd told me he'd been stuck in meetings all day. The final straw came when I overheard him on the phone one evening. I'd gone to bed early with a headache, but woke up to the sound of his hushed voice in the hallway. I know, he was saying. "I miss you too. But we have to be careful. Emily's been asking questions." My heart shattered into a million pieces. There it was. Undeniable proof. Ryan was having an affair. I lay there in the dark, silent tears streaming down my face, as Ryan continued his conversation. I heard him laugh softly, that special laugh he used to reserve just for me. It felt like a knife twisting in my gut. When he finally came to bed, I pretended to be asleep. He slipped under the covers, not even bothering to kiss me goodnight like he used to. As I listened to his breathing even out, I made a decision. I couldn't live like this anymore. I needed to know the truth, all of it. The next morning, I called in sick to work. As soon as Ryan left for the day, I sprang into action. I searched the house from top to bottom, looking for any evidence of his affair. I checked his dresser drawers, his closet, even the pockets of his jackets. In the back of his sock drawer, I found it, a small velvet jewelry box. My hands trembled as I opened it, revealing a delicate silver necklace with a heart pendant. Inside, the heart was an inscription. To A, all my love, R. I sank to the floor, clutching the necklace. It was real. It was all real. My marriage, my life, everything I thought I knew was crumbling around me. As I sat there, surrounded by the remnants of my shattered world, I realized something. I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I needed answers. I needed the truth. And I was going to get it, no matter what it took. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were wide with shock and sympathy. "Oh, Emily," she whispered. "What did you do next?" I took a deep breath, ready to continue my tale. Well, that's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to almost a whisper as I continued my story to Sarah. Her eyes were wide with anticipation. After finding that necklace, I knew I couldn't just sit around and wait for more clues to fall into my lap. I had to take action. So, the next day, I did something I never thought I'd do. I started my own little investigation. First things first, I needed allies. Remember my friend Lisa from work? Well, I decided to confide in her. We met for coffee after school, and I spilled everything. Her reaction was priceless. "That lying, cheating scumbag," she exclaimed, loud enough to make the barista jump. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Em. I've got your back." With Lisa on board, we hatched a plan. She'd help me keep tabs on Ryan's social media activity while I focused on gathering physical evidence. It felt a bit like we were playing detective. but the stakes were all too real. The next step was trickier. I needed access to Ryan's phone and computer, but he'd become increasingly protective of them. So, I decided to play dumb. One evening, as we were watching TV, I casually mentioned that my phone was acting up. "Hey, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I borrow your phone for a sec? Mine's being weird, and I need to check my email." Ryan hesitated for a moment, then handed it over. "Sure, just give it back when you're done." My heart was racing as I took the phone. I quickly forwarded a few suspicious-looking emails to myself before handing it back. "Thanks, babe," I said, planting a kiss on his cheek. The guilt in his eyes was almost imperceptible, but I caught it. Over the next few days, I dove into those emails. Most were innocuous, but a few stood out. There were several from an email address I didn't recognize, with subject lines like, "Can't wait to see you," and "Missing you already." My stomach churned as I read them, but I needed more. So I took the next step. I installed a keylogger on our home computer. It felt wrong, invasive even, but I was desperate for answers. Every night after Ryan went to bed, I'd pore over the day's logs, looking for any clues. It didn't take long to strike gold. One night, I found a chat log between Ryan and someone named Allison. My blood ran cold as I read their flirtatious exchanges. They were planning to meet up that weekend, at a hotel in the next town over. I couldn't believe it. All this time, I'd been hoping there was some innocent explanation. But here it was, in black and white. Ryan was planning a romantic getaway with another woman. The next day, I could barely focus at work. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I confront him? Follow him? I felt lost, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what I'd discovered. During my lunch break, I met up with Lisa again. She'd been monitoring Ryan's social media activity and had some news of her own. "You're not going to believe this," she said, pulling out her tablet. "Look at this woman's profile. Ryan's been liking and commenting on all her photos." I stared at the screen, my heart sinking. The woman was beautiful, tall, blonde, everything I wasn't. And there, in the comments of nearly every photo, was Ryan, leaving flirty messages and heart emojis. "Her name's Allison," Lisa said softly. "I think this might be her M." I nodded, unable to speak. It was all coming together now. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the mysterious A in his contacts. It was Allison. My husband was having an affair with this woman. As I sat there, staring at Allison's perfect smile on the screen, something inside me snapped. I was done being the clueless, devoted wife. It was time to take control of the situation. "Lisa," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "I need your help with something." She looked at me, concern etched on her face. "Anything, Em. What do you need?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to say. "I'm going to follow Ryan this weekend, to that hotel, and I need you to come with me." Lisa's eyes widened, but she didn't hesitate. "I'm in," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "I will get the proof you need." As we sat there, planning our stakeout, I felt a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, but also a strange sense of empowerment. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I was taking control. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of my journey. The weekend was approaching, and with it, the moment of truth. I was about to uncover the extent of Ryan's betrayal, and my life would never be the same again. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her mouth was hanging open in shock. "Oh my God, Emily," she breathed. "What happened next?" I took a sip of my now cold coffee, preparing to continue my tale. "Well, Sarah, that weekend turned out to be even more eventful than I could have imagined." I took a deep breath, steeling myself to continue my story. Sarah was on the edge of her seat, hanging onto my every word. So, the weekend finally arrived. I told Ryan I was going to visit my sister for a girls' weekend. He seemed relieved, probably thinking he'd have the house to himself for his rendezvous. If only he knew. Lisa picked me up early Saturday morning. We'd packed snacks, binoculars, and even a camera. It felt surreal, like we were in some kind of spy movie. But the pit in my stomach reminded me this was all too real. We parked across the street from the hotel, watching and waiting. Hours ticked by, and I started to wonder if we'd made a mistake. Maybe I'd misunderstood the messages. Maybe this was all a big misunderstanding. Then, around 2 p.m., a familiar car pulled into the parking lot. My heart stopped. It was Ryan. I watched as he got out, checked his reflection in the car window, and headed inside. He was carrying an overnight bag. "That lying bastard," Lisa muttered beside me. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, numb, as the reality of what was happening sank in. We waited another 20 minutes, and then she appeared. Allison. She was even more beautiful in person. All long legs and flowing blonde hair. She practically bounced into the hotel, looking excited and carefree. I felt sick. "Do you want to go in?" Lisa asked gently. I shook my head. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing them together. So we waited and waited. Hours passed. We saw them leave for dinner, looking cozy and intimate. When they returned, Ryan had his arm around her waist. It was like watching my whole world crumble in slow motion. As night fell, Lisa suggested we head back. "We had our proof," she said, "but I couldn't leave. I needed to see this through to the bitter end." It was nearly midnight when they emerged again. They were slightly drunk, laughing and holding hands as they made their way to the parking lot. And then, right there under the harsh glare of a streetlight, Ryan kissed her. It wasn't a friendly peck or a quick goodbye. It was deep, passionate, the kind of kiss we used to share. I don't remember much after that. Lisa tells me I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. She had to drive us home, me a mess in the passenger seat. The next day was Sunday. Ryan was due back that evening. I spent the day in a daze, trying to process what I'd seen. Part of me wanted to confront him the moment he walked through the door. Another part wanted to pretend nothing had happened, to cling to the illusion of our happy marriage for just a little longer. When he finally came home, he was all smiles and "I missed yous." He even brought me flowers. Daisies, my favorite. The sight of them made me want to throw up. "How was your trip?" I managed to ask, my voice surprisingly steady. "Oh, you know, same old work stuff," he replied, not quite meeting my eyes. I went through the motions of daily life, teaching my students, making dinner, watching TV with Ryan, all while my mind was constantly racing. I second-guessed everything. Maybe what I saw wasn't what I thought. Maybe there was an explanation I hadn't considered. I started noticing little things that I'd overlooked before, like how Ryan would always position himself so his phone screen was away from me when texting, or how he'd started doing his own laundry, something he'd never bothered with before. One day, I came home early from school to find Ryan on the phone in our bedroom. He didn't hear me come in, and I caught the tail end of his conversation. "I know, baby. I miss you too. Soon, I promise. We just need to be patient." I stood there, frozen, as he ended the call. When he turned and saw me, the color drained from his face. "Emily, I didn't hear you come in. How long have you been standing there?" I forced a smile. "Just got here. Everything okay?" He nodded, a bit too enthusiastically. Yeah, just work stuff. You know how it is." I nodded back, my heart breaking all over again at how easily the lies fell from his lips. That night, I lay awake long after Ryan had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the life we'd built together, the dreams we'd shared. I thought about Allison, with her perfect smile and long legs. And I thought about myself, the trusting fool who'd been blind to it all for so long. As the first light of dawn crept through our bedroom window, I made another decision. I was done being passive, done waiting for more clues to fall into my lap. It was time to take action, to get the concrete proof I needed to confront Ryan once and for all. Little did I know, My determination to uncover the truth would lead me down a path I never expected and change my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were wide with a mix of shock and anticipation. "Oh, Emily," she breathed. "What did you do next?" I took a sip of water, my throat dry from all the talking. "Well, Sarah, that's when things really started to get interesting." I leaned in closer to Sarah, my voice dropping to almost a whisper as I continued my story. After that night, I knew I couldn't just sit around waiting anymore. I needed to be proactive, to find irrefutable evidence of Ryan's affair. So, I decided to step up my game. First, I reached out to my tech-savvy cousin, Jake. I told him I was working on a surprise for Ryan and needed his help to track his location. I felt guilty lying, but I was desperate. Jake set me up with a tracking app that I could secretly install on Ryan's phone. The next challenge was getting access to Ryan's phone long enough to install the app. Opportunity struck when Ryan came down with a nasty flu. As he lay in bed, barely conscious, I swiped his phone and quickly installed the app. I felt like a criminal, but I pushed the guilt aside. With the tracker in place, I could now see Ryan's every move. Most days, it showed him at work or at home. But then, one Tuesday afternoon, I watched as the little dot that represented my husband moved to an unfamiliar address across town. My heart raced as I plugged the address into Google Maps. It was a small cafe, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. I debated with myself for all of 2 seconds before grabbing my keys and heading out the door. I parked a block away and walked to the cafe, my palms sweating. As I approached, I saw them through the window, Ryan and Allison, sitting close together, laughing over coffee. I ducked behind a nearby tree, my legs shaking. They looked so happy, comfortable, like they'd done this 100 times before, which, I realized with a sinking feeling, they probably had. I watched as Ryan reached across the table, taking Allison's hand in his. The way he looked at her. It was how he used to look at me. My chest tightened, and I found it hard to breathe. Just then, my phone buzzed. A text from Ryan. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, then back at the couple in the cafe. The lies, the deception, it all hit me at once. I felt sick to my stomach. I don't know how long I stood there, watching them. Eventually, they got up to leave. I panicked, diving into a nearby alley. As they walked past, I heard snippets of their conversation. "Next week. Hotel. Can't wait." I slumped against the wall, tears streaming down my face. It was real. It was all real. Over the next few days, I threw myself into gathering more evidence. I combed through our credit card statements, finding charges for restaurants and hotels I knew nothing about. I dug deeper into Ryan's emails, uncovering a secret account he'd been using to communicate with Allison. Each new piece of evidence was like a knife to my heart, but I couldn't stop. I needed to know everything. Then, about a week after the cafe incident, I hit the jackpot. Ryan had left his laptop open while he went to shower. I hesitated for a moment before sitting down at his desk. This was it, the moment of truth. I opened his browser history and there it was, a confirmation email for a weekend getaway. 2 nights at a luxury resort scheduled for the following weekend. The reservation was for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. How original, Ryan. As I stared at the screen, something inside me snapped. I was done being the victim. Done crying over a man who clearly didn't value our marriage. It was time to turn the tables. I quickly forwarded the confirmation email to myself, then cleared the browser history. By the time Ryan got out of the shower, I was back on the couch, pretending to read a book. "Everything okay, hun?" he asked, noticing my flushed face. I smiled sweetly. "Everything's perfect." That night, I lay awake, formulating a plan. I wasn't going to confront Ryan, not yet. No, I had something much better in mind. The next day, I called Lisa. "I need your help with something," I said. "It's time we caught Ryan red-handed." Lisa was all in. We spent hours planning, going over every detail. By the end of the day, we had a foolproof plan to expose Ryan's affair once and for all. As the week progressed, I watched Ryan closely. He was distracted, constantly checking his phone and making excuses to work late. Little did he know, I was one step ahead of him the entire time. Friday finally arrived. As Ryan packed his bag for his business trip, I felt a strange calm wash over me. This was it, the moment that would change everything. "Have a good trip, honey," I said, kissing him goodbye. "Don't work too hard." Ryan smiled, looking relieved. "Thanks, babe. I'll call you when I get there." As soon as he left, I sprang into action. I had my own packing to do, after all. Lisa picked me up early Saturday morning, and we hit the road. The drive to the resort felt like it took forever, my stomach in knots the entire time. "You sure you want to do this?" Lisa asked as we pulled into the parking lot. I nodded, my jaw set. I need to see it with my own eyes. No more doubts, no more second guessing. We checked into a room on the floor below Ryan's. The plan was simple: wait for Ryan and Allison to leave their room, then use the spare keycard I'd sweet-talked out of the receptionist to gather evidence. Hours ticked by. We ordered room service, watched bad TV, anything to distract ourselves. Finally, around 7 p.m., my phone buzzed. The tracking app showed Ryan and Allison leaving the resort. "It's time," I said to Lisa, my voice surprisingly steady. We made our way to their room, my heart pounding so loud I was sure someone would hear it. With shaking hands, I slid the keycard into the lock. The light turned green, and we were in. The room was a mess, clothes strewn about, empty champagne bottles on the nightstand. I felt sick as I took it all in. This was where my husband had been betraying me, where our marriage was crumbling. Lisa started taking photos while I rummaged through Ryan's suitcase, and there it was, a small velvet box. Inside was a beautiful diamond necklace. The card read, "To my dearest Allison, all my love, Ryan." I clutched the box, tears streaming down my face. Lisa came over, wrapping me in a hug. "We've got what we need," she said softly. "Let's go." But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, staring at the necklace that symbolized the death of my marriage. Suddenly, we heard voices in the hallway. Ryan and Allison were back early. "Shit!" Lisa hissed. "What do we do?" In a panic, we looked around the room, the balcony. Without thinking, we rushed out, closing the door behind us just as we heard the room key in the lock. We pressed ourselves against the wall, hardly daring to breathe. Through the thin curtains, we could see their silhouettes. Ryan pulled Allison close, kissing her deeply. "I love you," he murmured. "I can't wait to start our life together." My world shattered. It wasn't just an affair. Ryan was planning to leave me. We stayed there, frozen, as Ryan and Allison got ready for bed. Finally, after what felt like hours, the lights went out and we heard soft snoring. Carefully, we crept back into the room. Lisa gestured towards the door, but I shook my head. I wasn't done yet. I tiptoed to Ryan's suitcase and pulled out the necklace. In its place, I left my wedding ring and a note. "I know everything. Enjoy your new life. Emily." As we slipped out of the room, a strange calm washed over me. It was done. I had my proof. The next morning, Lisa and I were having breakfast in the hotel restaurant when I saw them, Ryan and Allison, walking hand in hand, looking disgustingly happy. Then Ryan froze, his eyes locking with mine. The color drained from his face. He let go of Allison's hand, taking a step towards me. But I stood up, grabbing Lisa's arm. "Let's go," I said, loud enough for Ryan to hear. "I've seen everything I need to see." As we walked out, I could hear Ryan calling my name, but I didn't look back. I was done with him. The drive home was a blur. Lisa kept asking if I was okay, but I couldn't find the words to respond. How could I be okay? My entire life had just imploded. When we got home, I asked Lisa to stay with me. I couldn't bear the thought of being alone. We sat on the couch, drinking wine and eating ice cream straight from the container. "What are you going to do now?" Lisa asked gently. I took a deep breath. I don't know, but I know I can't stay with him. It's over. Just then, my phone exploded with notifications, texts and voicemails from Ryan, each more desperate than the last. Emily, please, let me explain. It's not what you think. I'm sorry. I love you. Please come home. I turned off my phone, unable to deal with his lies anymore. As night fell, I heard a key in the lock. Ryan burst in, looking disheveled and panicked. Emily, he gasped. I can explain everything. I stood up, facing him. There's nothing to explain, Ryan. I saw everything. I know everything. Please, he begged, reaching for me. It was a mistake. I love you. I stepped back, out of his reach. No, Ryan, you love her. You said it yourself. Remember? You can't wait to start your new life with her. The color drained from his face as he realized I'd overheard them. Emily, please, he whispered. We can work this out. I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. No, we can't. It's over, Ryan. I want a divorce. As I said those words, something inside me broke. The last shred of hope I'd been clinging to vanished. Our marriage was truly over. Ryan collapsed onto the couch, his head in his hands. What have I done? He mumbled. I looked at him, this man I'd loved for so long, now a stranger to me. You made your choice, I said quietly. Now you have to live with it. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were wide with shock and sympathy. Oh, Emily, she whispered. What happened next? I took a deep breath, preparing to continue my story. Well, that's when things really got complicated. I took a deep breath, steeling myself to recount the most intense part of my story. Sarah leaned in, her eyes wide with anticipation. The next few days were a blur of emotions and confrontations. Ryan was relentless, constantly calling and texting, begging for a chance to explain. I ignored him as best I could, but eventually I knew I had to face him. We agreed to meet at a local coffee shop. Neutral ground, I thought. As I walked in, I saw him sitting in a corner booth, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Good, I thought bitterly. Let him suffer. Emily, he said as I sat down, his voice cracking. Thank you for coming. I just stared at him, waiting. He squirmed under my gaze. I kept telling myself I'd end it, but you didn't, I finished for him. Instead, you lied to me, over and over again. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed bitterly. Well, you did a pretty good job of it anyway. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his betrayal hanging heavy between us. So what now? I finally asked. You were planning to leave me for her, weren't you? Ryan's head snapped up. How did you... I heard you, I said, at the resort. You told her you couldn't wait to start your new life together. He deflated, all pretense of denial gone. Yes, he admitted. We had talked about it, but Emily, I was confused. I didn't know what I wanted. And now, I asked, dreading the answer. Now, I realize what a huge mistake I've made, he said, reaching for my hand across the table. I pulled away. I love you, Emily. I want to make this work. I stared at him, searching his face for any trace of the man I'd married, but all I saw was a stranger. No, I said, my voice firm. It's too late for that, Ryan. You made your choice. Please, he begged, tears in his eyes. Give me another chance. I'll do anything. I stood up, gathering my things. You had your chance, Ryan. You had years of chances, and you threw them all away for her. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. Emily, wait. There's something else you should know. I paused, looking back at him. What? He swallowed hard. Allison, she's pregnant. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I stumbled, gripping the edge of the table for support. What? I whispered, my voice barely audible. She's pregnant, Ryan repeated, his voice hollow. About 2 months along. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Not only had Ryan betrayed me, but he'd created a whole new life with this woman, a life that should have been ours. "When were you planning to tell me this?" I asked, my voice shaking with rage. I don't know," he admitted. "I was hoping it wasn't true, that it was a mistake." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Well, congratulations, Ryan. Looks like you're going to be a father after all." With that, I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, ignoring his calls behind me. I made it to my car before the tears started falling. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind reeling from this new revelation. By the time I got home, I felt numb, empty, like everything I'd ever believed in had been a lie. As I walked into my house, I was hit with a wave of memories. Our first night here, painting the walls together, planning our future, a future that would never come to pass. In a daze, I wandered from room to room, touching things that suddenly felt alien to me. Photos of us smiling, blissfully unaware of the storm to come. Books we'd read together, the quilt Ryan's grandmother had made for our wedding. I ended up in our bedroom, staring at the bed we'd shared for years. How many nights had I slept there, oblivious to Ryan's betrayal? How many mornings had I woken up next to him, believing in our love, while he was thinking of her? In a sudden burst of energy, I started throwing things into boxes, clothes, books, everything that reminded me of Ryan. I couldn't bear to look at them anymore. As I was clearing out his nightstand, I found it, a small, velvet box, hidden in the back of the drawer. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring, an engagement ring, but not mine. The note inside read, "To Allison, the love of my life, will you marry me?" I sank to the floor, clutching the ring box. This was it, the final proof that our marriage was well and truly over. I don't know how long I sat there, crying until I had no tears left. When I finally looked up, the sun had set, casting long shadows across the room. In that moment, I made a decision. I was done being the victim, done crying over a man who clearly didn't value our marriage. It was time to take control of my life. I stood up, wiping my tears away. I had work to do. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her mouth was hanging open in shock. "Oh my God, Emily," she breathed. "What did you do next?" I smiled, a hint of steel in my eyes. "Well, Sarah, that's when I decided to fight back." I took a deep breath, my voice quieter now as I continued my story to Sarah. Her eyes were filled with concern and anticipation. After that night, everything seemed to fall apart. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of emotions: anger, betrayal, sadness, and a crushing sense of failure. How could I have been so blind? How could I have let this happen? The next few weeks were a blur. I called in sick to work, unable to face my students or colleagues. I couldn't bear the thought of their pity or, worse, their judgment. What if they had all known? What if I was the last one to figure it out? Most days, I couldn't even get out of bed. I'd lay there, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of my marriage in my head, looking for signs I might have missed, clues that could have warned me about Ryan's betrayal. Lisa tried her best to help. She'd come over with food, force me to eat, try to get me to talk, but I just couldn't. It was like I'd lost my voice along with my marriage. One particularly bad day, I found myself going through our wedding album. Each photo felt like a knife to my heart. There we were, so young, so in love, so full of hope for the future, a future that now lay in ruins. I don't know what came over me, but suddenly I was tearing the photos to shreds, ripping apart the memories of a life that no longer existed. By the time I came to my senses, the floor was covered in tiny pieces of paper, like confetti at a funeral for my marriage. That night, I hit rock bottom. I found myself sitting on the bathroom floor, a bottle of wine in one hand and a bottle of sleeping pills in the other. For a moment, just a moment, I considered ending it all. The pain was just too much to bear, but then I caught sight of myself in the mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. Her eyes were hollow, her face gaunt, This wasn't me. This couldn't be me. I threw the pills in the toilet and flushed them away. No, I wouldn't let Ryan destroy me like this. I refused to be another tragic story, another woman broken by a cheating husband. The next morning, I dragged myself to a therapist. Dr. Anderson listened patiently as I poured out my heart, my fears, my anger. She didn't judge, didn't try to fix me. She just listened. "Emily," she said gently at the end of our session, "what happened to you is terrible, but it doesn't define you. You are so much more than Ryan's wife or Ryan's victim." Her words struck a chord in me. Who was I without Ryan? I'd been so caught up in being his wife, I'd forgotten how to be just Emily. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into therapy. It was hard, painful work. There were days when I felt like I was making progress, and days when I felt like I was right back at square one. One day, about a month after that first session, Dr. Anderson asked me a question that changed everything. "Emily," she said, "if you could say anything to Ryan right now without consequences, what would it be?" I thought for a moment, then the words just started pouring out. I'd tell him that he's a coward, that he took the easy way out instead of working on our marriage, that he threw away years of love and trust for a fling, that he's not half the man I thought he was. Dr. Anderson nodded. "And how does saying that make you feel?" I paused, surprised by my answer. "Powerful," I said. "It makes me feel powerful." That was the turning point. I realized that I'd been giving Ryan all the power. By wallowing in my pain, I was letting him win. It was time to take that power back. I started small. I went back to work, holding my head high despite the whispers and pitying looks. I joined a support group for divorced women, finding strength in their stories of survival and reinvention. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still days when the pain would hit me out of nowhere. I'd see a happy couple walking hand in hand, or catch a whiff of Ryan's favorite cologne, and suddenly I'd be right back in that dark place. The worst was when I ran into Allison at the grocery store. Her belly was just starting to show, and she had that radiant glow of an expectant mother. Our eyes met across the produce section, and for a moment, time stood still. I saw a flicker of guilt cross her face before she quickly looked away. As she hurried past me, I caught a glimpse of a diamond ring on her finger, Ryan's ring, the one meant for her. I barely made it to my car before breaking down. All the progress I'd made seemed to evaporate in an instant. I cried until I had no tears left, my heart breaking all over again. But this time, something was different. As I sat there in my car, surrounded by groceries and tissues, I felt a spark of anger ignite inside me. Why should I be the one hiding? Why should I be the one ashamed? I dried my eyes, fixed my makeup, and marched back into that store. I held my head high as I finished my shopping, even managing a cold smile when I passed Allison again at the checkout. That night, as I unpacked my groceries, I realized something. The pain wasn't gone. It might never be completely gone, but it no longer controlled me. I was stronger than my pain, stronger than Ryan's betrayal. I looked at myself in the mirror again. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same broken shell from a few weeks ago. Her eyes had a spark of determination. Her jaw was set with resolve. "You're going to be okay," I told my reflection, and for the first time in months, I actually believed it. I paused, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were brimming with tears. "Oh, Emily," she whispered. "You're so strong." I smiled, a small, sad smile. "I had to be," I said, "because what came next? Well, that was the real test." I took a deep breath, ready to conclude my story. Sarah leaned in, her eyes wide with anticipation. After that day in the grocery store, something shifted inside me. I was done being the victim. It was time to take control of my life and show Ryan, Allison, and everyone else that I wasn't just going to roll over and disappear. First things first, I needed a change of scenery. Our house, my house now, held too many memories. Every corner reminded me of Ryan and our shattered life together. So, I decided to sell it. The day I put the for sale sign in the yard, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was like I was physically letting go of my old life. Next, I threw myself into my career. I'd always loved teaching, but I realized I'd been playing it safe, content with my current position. No more. I enrolled in a master's program in education, determined to become the best damn teacher I could be. Balancing work and school was tough, but it gave me purpose. For the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just treading water. As I was rebuilding my life, Ryan was watching his fall apart. Word got out about his affair. Small-town gossip spreads like wildfire. His colleagues at the car dealership started giving him the cold shoulder. Clients requested different salespeople. His golden boy reputation was tarnished beyond repair. One day, Lisa came to me with some interesting news. "You won't believe what I heard," she said, her eyes gleaming with gossip. "Ryan got fired." I raised an eyebrow. "Really? What happened?" Apparently, the dealership owner had a zero-tolerance policy for employees who brought drama to the workplace. Between the affair scandal and Ryan's increasingly erratic behavior, they'd had enough. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a twinge of satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, was finally catching up to Ryan. But I didn't have much time to dwell on Ryan's misfortunes. I was too busy with my own life. I joined a local community theater group, rediscovering my love for acting that I'd abandoned after college. It felt good to be on stage again, to lose myself in different characters. Months flew by. Before I knew it, a year had passed since that fateful day at the resort. I'd sold the house, moved into a cozy apartment, and was halfway through my master's program. I'd made new friends, reconnected with old ones, and even gone on a few dates. Though nothing serious, I wasn't ready for that yet. Then came the day of the community fair. I was manning the booth for the theater group when I saw them, Ryan and Allison, pushing a stroller. Ryan looked different, older somehow. The confident swagger he used to have was gone, replaced by a defeated slump in his shoulders. Our eyes met across the crowded fairground. For a moment, I felt a flood of emotions: anger, hurt, nostalgia. But then, surprisingly, I felt nothing. Ryan no longer had any power over me. I turned back to my booth, engaging with a young girl interested in our upcoming production of The Wizard of Oz. As I chatted with her, I caught Ryan staring at me out of the corner of my eye. I ignored him. Later that evening, as I was packing up the booth, Ryan approached me. He looked nervous, fidgeting with his wedding ring, the one that used to be mine. "Emily," he said softly. You look great." I smiled politely. "Thank you, Ryan. How are you?" He shrugged, his eyes downcast. "I've been better. Listen, Emily, I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to know that." I looked at him, really looked at him, the man I'd once loved, the man who'd broken my heart, and I realized something. I pitied him. "I appreciate that, Ryan," I said. "I hope you're happy with the choices you've made." He flinched at my words, but nodded. "You seem to be doing well," he said. "I'm glad." I smiled, and this time it was genuine. I am doing well, better than I ever thought I could be. As Ryan walked away, I felt the last piece of my old life fall away. I was free. Truly, completely free. The next week, I got a call from the school board. They were impressed with my work in the master's program and wanted to offer me a position as the new curriculum coordinator for the entire district. As I hung up the phone, tears of joy streaming down my face, I realized something. All of this, wouldn't have happened if Ryan hadn't cheated. His betrayal had been the catalyst for my transformation. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was strong, confident, and happy. She wasn't defined by her relationship status or by the man who had hurt her. She was defined by her own accomplishments, her own strength. That night, I raised a glass to myself, to the woman I'd become, to the life I'd built from the ashes of my marriage. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited about the future. My future. I finished my story, looking at Sarah. Her eyes were shining with tears and admiration. "Emily," she said, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "You're amazing. I can't believe how far you've come." I smiled, feeling a sense of pride wash over me. "It wasn't easy," I admitted, "but I learned that I'm stronger than I ever knew, and that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can lead to the best version of yourself." As we sat there, sipping our coffee, I felt a profound sense of peace. My journey wasn't over, far from it, but I was ready for whatever came next, because now I knew that no matter what life threw at me, I could handle it. I was Emily, and I was unstoppable.